Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast of Born from Sin. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about my dad, and I want to make sure that everybody knows that there's a trigger warning on this video. Although I'm not going to go into a lot of details about the actual sexual abuse that I went through, there's going to be stuff in there that might be a little bit graphic. So again, trigger warning in case you've ever been abused. I don't want to traumatize you any more than you already might be. So let's get started. My dad was born on November the 5th, 1941, in a town called Westmoreland, which is now amalgamated into Moncton, which is where I currently live. My dad passed away on November the 11th, 1993. So that would have been Remembrance Day here for us in Canada. He was 52 years old when he passed away. I remember my dad being two totally different people. If you asked anybody that didn't really know us, but someone that he might have worked with or a buddy of his, they would all tell you that my dad was an outstanding man. And I can understand why, because he was very helpful. He was the type of guy that would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. He would give you the last dollar in his pocket to help you out because you needed a meal. I remember being a child and we were living out in Skiduk, which is just outside of Moncton here. Um, and there was a couple that had broken down, and we just lived in like a little trailer. And I mean, it was just a little old beat up trailer, 2 bedrooms, I think it was. Anyways, there was a couple that had broken down on the side of the highway. They had little ones with them. And like back in the 70s, it was not very unusual for someone to step out and help somebody that was in trouble. So if you're broken down on the side of the road, someone could be driving by and they would literally stop and check on you and see if you were okay. They would literally invite you into their home because the gas station or the garage that you have to go to is currently closed. And there's, depending on where you break down, there might not be anything around, like no hotel, no nothing. Like back in the 70s, things were very scarce. It's not like they are today. And again, people back then didn't have cell phones, so it's not like they could call for help like you can now. So a lot of people would stop on the side of the highway if they seen somebody broken down. My dad just happened to be one of those people. Couple broke down, like I said, out in Skidoo. My dad happened to be driving home from work, saw them, pulled over, helped them out, brought them home. And there was no, giving you a heads up that you were bringing someone home. He walked through the door and boom, he had this family with him that was going to be staying with us for, a couple days because it was a weekend and the garage wasn't open until Monday. So people would praise my dad for who he was because he always went above and beyond to help somebody out in any way that he could. He was also the type of man that loved a good time. He he loves to drink. He loves singing. He loved music. He had a lot of life in him. Um, and again, he would go above and beyond for anybody. He was also the type of person that he would be out in public somewhere, and a couple, let's say, would be arguing or fighting, and the guy would, take a swing at his wife or his girlfriend. Or my dad would be the first person to stand up and walk right over to that person and stop them from hitting their wife. So I can understand fully why people thought that he was an outstanding guy. Like I get it. What they didn't know was the John Gallant that I grew up with. The John Gallant that behind closed doors was cruel. The John Gallant that behind closed doors would rape his daughter and beat his wife the very same day. At the age of 4 is when my abuse first started with my dad. Um, my mom had gone out for a girls' night, and I was left at home alone. I was 4 years old at the time. We were living in Edmonton, Alberta, and my mom didn't go out very often, so it wasn't a big deal that she had gone out to bingo with a couple of friends. So 4 years old, and mom's off to bingo, and that was the very first time that my dad sexually abused me. It was probably the most horrific part of my childhood, being raped by him and having my innocence taken away from me that night was a very cruel, hard lesson on who my dad actually was. When we left Edmonton, Alberta, we ended up moving back to the Skiduk area, and my abuse continued there. That little trailer that we lived in, the place was my nightmare. My dad continued to sexually abuse me from the age of 4 until I was 11 years old. He he was cruel in so many ways. He would literally look at me and say things like, "Oh, you're so pretty." And then he'd look at me in in a heartbeat and say, "Pretty ugly." How do you look at your child and tell them that they're beautiful in one sentence and then just take it all away? And of course, being young, I had no idea what he meant by that. Pretty, pretty ugly. It wasn't until I grew up much later on that I kind of pieced that whole pretty ugly thing together. And it stuck with me for a very long time. I couldn't figure out how he could be so cruel to call me pretty and then pretty ugly. That was pretty ugly of him. When we lived in Skiduk, my parents fought a lot. And I mean a lot. My dad was an alcoholic to the point that the man would go out, get drunk, get in his truck, drive home, and be passed out at the wheel the next morning. Truck still running, music blaring loud, and he was passed out. If it wasn't for my mom's little car that was in the driveway, my dad would have continued driving straight and either into the trailer that we lived in or into the field that was in the back. He he had no shame sometimes. He would beat my mom continuously. I can't tell you how many times I've watched that man beat my mom to a pulp. I remember one time he had beat her so bad that she ended up in the hospital, and her face was so swollen that you could not recognize her at all. It took almost, I'm gonna say, 4 months before that swelling went down and my mom became somewhat recognizable again. He was cruel in so many ways. They used to fight on a very consistent basis. I remember shortly after we moved to Skiduk from Edmonton, Alberta, my parents had gotten into a huge fight, and my dad left. But when he left us without anything. My mom wasn't working at the time. My dad was literally the only person that had an income coming in, and he just up and left. There was very little food in our cupboard. My mom made a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter stretch out for almost 2 weeks for just me. She had some eggs in the fridge, so she made sure that I had like a scrambled egg or a fried egg or something like that in the morning. And I'm telling you, I don't remember seeing my mom eat during that time. She kept whatever little bit of rations of food that dad left us with, and she made sure that I was fed. And it's something that I'll always thank my mom for, because I know she was going through a lot herself as well. She has schizophrenia, so um, she was dealing with her own mental health, plus dealing with the stress of not having an income anymore and not having food in the house for your child. And back then, again, it wasn't very easy to just pick up the phone and call welfare. Welfare back then existed, but it was very difficult to get on the system. You literally had to be separated from your significant other for at least 6 months before they would even consider helping you out. Because back then, a lot of people fought and they got back together. So that was their way of preventing giving out government money that might not have been needed because so and so broke up, and a month later, oh, they don't need the money anymore because the husband's back. So my dad had been gone probably about 2, 3 months. And he decided to call the house one day. It just so happened that it was my 5th birthday. My mom and I were outside the little trailer out in Skiduk, and we were setting up my birthday party. We were gonna have KFC. I was gonna have a couple friends over, mostly family friends, like cousins. But I was still gonna have a couple people over, and we were gonna have a good time because he hadn't been in our lives for a couple months. We were free from the abuse that he was putting us through, and we felt a lot of freedom. So celebrating my 5th birthday was a big deal, not having him there so that it could be a peaceful birthday. And then all of a sudden, the phone rang. I had gone inside to go get something for my mom while she was still outside setting up the birthday party. And the phone rang and I answered it. And it was my dad. And the one guaranteed way that you knew that my dad was drunk was when he called the house. He always said, "What are you doing?" When I heard those words, "What are you doing?" on my 5th birthday, I started crying. My mom, at this point, came inside the trailer and she saw me crying and she knew right away. She knew that it was my dad on the other side of that phone. So she grabbed the phone from me and kind of pushed me aside, told me to go to my room and that she'd be right there. And there was a whole bunch of yelling and screaming that went on. I could only hear mom's side of the conversation, obviously. But she kept saying, "No, no, you're not going to do that to us. No, you can't. Today is not the day to be doing this." And then she started crying. She hung up the phone, and I could hear her running down the hallway to my room to come get me. She opened up the door. She grabbed me. She said, "Let's go. I have to make one more quick phone call." She called my grandfather and my uncle. It was a very brief conversation. It was, "John has a gun. He's on his way here." And she hung up. She then picked me up and locked the trailer door. And we went down into her bedroom where we sat on the bed and she hugged me and told me that she loved me and that she was very sorry for everything that was about to happen. And that if we made it through, that she promised me we would never have to go through this ever again. And about 15, 20 minutes later, there was my dad. You could hear the truck in the driveway. It was it was a loud truck. You knew it was his truck. You heard the slamming of the truck door of him getting out, and you heard the footsteps of him coming up those few steps that were leading up to that trailer door. The trailer door was locked, so when he tried the handle, couldn't get in, he just kicked the door in. Busted the door off the frame. Um, we we were crying, and I remember crying, and I remember her just holding me and hugging me and telling me that we were gonna be okay. It was gonna be all right. That my grandfather and my uncle would be there any moment. We would be okay. And she just held my face to her chest so that I wouldn't look at the door and see my dad walking in with that gun. My mom had put like a small dresser in front of the door to kind of barricade us in there a little bit more. And my dad just slammed his way through and just like heaved himself up against this door until the dresser fell over and he just shoved that door open and in he came. At that point, he started screaming and yelling at my mom, saying that he couldn't believe that she was doing this to him, blah, blah, blah. I don't remember the whole conversation, just a whole lot of screaming and yelling. And then I remember hearing the gun, the cocking of that shotgun. Probably one of the most terrifying experiences. I say one of my most terrifying experiences, but there were just so many terrifying experiences with this man. I don't really honestly think that I can pick just one. Sitting on the bed with mom and dad cocks the gun and he's about to pull the trigger. He is literally pointing a shotgun at me and my mom, and he's just screaming and yelling and freaking out, and I'm going to kill you, and if I can't have you, nobody else can. And he just went on and on and on. And it seemed to take forever, and all I could think of was, am I dying? Is this how I'm gonna die? I was 5 years old. It was my 5th birthday. Like, this was not how a child was supposed to celebrate a 5th birthday. He just continues screaming and yelling, and then all of a sudden I could hear these footsteps. They're coming up and behind Dad. And as he pulled that trigger, I could see a hand hit the gun from behind my dad, and the gun went up, it went off, and it blew a hole in her ring. And that was my uncle that saved my life and my mom's life that night. My dad was a very harsh man. I always wanted a pet growing up. I always I wanted a dog or a cat or a guinea pig or something. I loved animals as a child. And the one day my dad finally gave in and let me have the dog. And I was so excited about this little dog. I mean, it was a little girl, and we tried to call it like anything you could think of, like Tina, Tiny, Bella. Like, we tried everything. And I still laugh at it to this day because one day I sneezed and the dog came running. So every time that someone sneezed, this little dog, this little chihuahua, came running. So in the in the end, we ended up calling her Pikachu. And she was the sweetest little thing. She was beige and white, just this tiny, tiny little thing. And she was yappy, but she was only yappy when my dad was around. When my dad wasn't there, she was such a good little girl. Like, she loved to play, and she would chase me around the house, and I'd give her treats, and I had so much fun with her, so much fun. And then around supper time, we'd roll around, and the dog would all of a sudden start acting very weird, trembling. It would pee on the floor, and it would poo. It would poo on the floor. And this only happened in and around dinner time on a regular basis. And that was the time that my dad would come home. And my dad, being a very aggressive man at times and being loud and screaming and being very hostile and angry all the time, freaked the dog out. And one day, my dad was on his way home from work, and Chikachu got extremely nervous like she always did, and she happened to poop near the front door. Mom and I didn't notice it right away. When we did notice it, it was already too late at that point because Dad had come into the house and stepped in the dog poop. And he was freaking livid. He was so mad that he screamed and yelled at me for a good half an hour about how irresponsible I was, how I said I was going to take care of this dog, how he's the one that always has to pick up after it, how it's always barking and yapping, it's peeing all over the place. I did not do my job at training this dog, blah, blah, blah. It went on and on and on. And then he screamed at my mom for not noticing and not paying attention to me and making sure that I'm taking care of the dog, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. It went on and on and on. My mom and I stood there and we were just bawling our faces off because he was just so brutally mean. The words that were coming out of his mouth were freaking terrible. And if that wasn't punishment enough, he decided that we no longer were going to have this dog. And he took Pikachu, got his gun, went behind our little trailer that we lived in Skidoo, put the dog down, and shot it. All because it peed and pooed on the floor because it was nervous to be around him. He killed my dog. Then he came back, brought the shotgun in the house, and looked at us and told us that if we ever asked for another dog again, that we were going to be the next ones to get the gun. That's just who John Gallant was. We used to visit a family that lived across the road from the trailer that we lived in Skidoo. My parents used to go over there. I used to play with their kids, and my parents and them play cards together. They played euchre a lot and crib, hearts, and stuff like that. So anyways, one day we were over there visiting, and all the adults were sitting around playing cards, and they were drinking at the table and laughing and so on and so forth and having a good time. And I was out playing with their kids, and we were outside, and then we came in, and I was getting a little hungry. So I went to go ask my mom what time we were having dinner because I was getting a little hungry. I was maybe 7 years old at the time. And my mom was sitting with her back to the wall. My dad was sitting across from her, and it was this big, long kitchen table. The table's like in front of her, and my dad's on the other side. I go in behind the table to go ask my mom a question about when we were going to be having dinner because I was getting a little hungry. And they were in the middle of a serious card game. And because I was taking too long to ask my question, my dad flipped right out to the point where he took that kitchen table, flipped it up against my mom and I. We were pinned behind a kitchen table against a wall at our neighbor's house. The mother was freaking out and trying to get my dad, to stop doing what he was doing. And the father was, literally, he literally had to grab a hold of my dad and friggin' pull him off of the table for the table to drop so that my mom and I were no longer pinned behind a kitchen table against a friggin' kitchen wall. When he snapped, he snapped. He was above and beyond. He was in and out of my life a lot during my childhood. The times that he weren't there were so much better than the times that he was. However, when he was sober, I tread very lightly with this topic because when my dad was sober, he was a good man. He was that man that would help someone on the side of the road. He was very, caring towards me and my mom. He had no problem showing me how to throw a ball or how to help him fix his truck or to go camping or go fishing. And he was very, very amazing when it came to that stuff. However, when he was sober, that was also the only time that he raped me. And that part always baffled me. Because he was always very mean when he was drunk. Like, when he was just downright drunk, you could expect anything from that man. But sober, he was usually the very caring person that, everybody outside of our house would see. The guy that would give you the shirt off his back. And yet, it was only when he was sober that he would rape me. I still to this day can't make any sense of it, and I probably never will, but that's all right. I have, fortunately healed past all that stuff. Like I said, so My dad was gone for a very, big portion of my childhood. It was very back and forth. The times that he was there, mostly miserable, abusive, drunk, angry. And the times that he wasn't around, well, mom and I got a little bit more freedom and we got to live a little bit more, I guess you could say, without, constantly being watched or abused or harassed by this man. At the age of 11, my dad was getting ready to do a father-daughter camping trip. Now, again, because camping was something that we did quite often and something that was actually a very fun and enjoyable family time together, my mom didn't see this as being a problem. Now, for years, my mom had asked me whether my dad was sexually abusing me or not because she did know about, the physical abuse, like, him beating me with a belt, and she knew about the mental and verbal abuse, but she always questioned me about the sexual abuse, and I always said no because I was petrified of my father, and rightfully so. You don't go around squealing on someone that's held a gun on you. You just don't do that. So, 11 years old, my dad's getting ready to do this father-daughter camping trip. And my mom's like, yeah, okay, cool. It'd be good bonding time for you guys, blah, 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 blah. Starts packing us up sandwiches because we're going to be leaving in a couple days, some extra cookies and whatever. So that way there, when we're leaving on Saturday morning, um, we're all ready to go and just throw everything in a cooler and we're on our way. And then I found out from overhearing it that there was going to be a couple of other guys that were going to be attending this father-daughter camping trip. And neither one of these men had children. Why would they be going on this camping trip with us? Made no sense. They were friends with my dad, but the reason why they were going to be going on this camping trip is because, like many of times before my mom wasn't around, my dad would let them rape me as well. This father-daughter camping trip was going to end up being an entire frigging nightmare of a weekend of me being raped by my father, his two friends, and God knows what else. The Thursday before this camping trip was the very first time that I learned that my father sexually abusing me was actually wrong. I was 11 years old and I was at school and we were in the big gymnasium. We had a police officer that came in to talk to us about good and bad feelings and touching, and it was at that very, very moment that I sat there just taking in everything that they were talking about and realizing that all these years that my father sexually abused me was actually wrong. It wasn't right. That was not how a father was supposed to love his daughter. I went home that day and I sat in my bedroom. I did my homework and um, I debated saying something to my mom, and I didn't. I was afraid. I was very confused about what I had just heard about, such being sexually abused wasn't right. It didn't matter who it was. That nobody should be raping you. Nobody should be abusing you in that way. And I was very, I was very torn apart about finally telling the truth about my dad raping me. The next day, the Friday, um, I ended up staying home from school because my dad was working night shift and he was going to crash out for a few hours and then we were going to leave probably like around noon to go on this father-daughter camping trip. My mom and I had gone upstairs to one of the neighbors' place for a visit and let my dad sleep, blah, blah, blah. And that was the moment when I finally told my mom about my dad raping me. And my mom completely lost her shit. She left me upstairs in the apartment with our neighbor, grabbed a butcher knife, walked down the stairs into the apartment where my dad was sleeping, into the bedroom, and stood there with that knife and debated stabbing him. And then walked out of the room, down the hallway, out the apartment door, back up the stairs to the neighbor's house, and put the knife away. She was so angry that he was raping me. She lost her cool, and she literally, I thought she was gonna kill. And the next thing that she did is she called the police. She told me that everything was gonna be okay, that she believed me, that it was never gonna happen again. The police showed up and took my dad away. And you would think that that would be the end of the torture, but it wasn't. It was the end of my sexual abuse, 100%. And it was no longer after that very day. I never ended up going out on the father-daughter camping trip where God knows what the hell he had planned for me, but I was never raped by him ever again after that day. Instead, he decided that he was going to make sure that I paid for telling. He did little things. We were living in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. That's when I had told my mom about him raping me. So police came and picked him up, and he ended up behind bars, and then he was released, and the peace bond that was put on him and that he had to keep 500 feet away from us. If we went into the local shopping center and, we went to go get groceries or whatever kind of thing, like most malls, they have like a little food court. So my dad used to go there quite often to hang out with his then AA buddies and have coffee and, get right and believe in God and blah, blah, blah. And so he would hang out with them all quite often, having coffee there. So it made it very difficult for us to be able to go do stuff like shopping for groceries because with this peace bond that was put in, he had to remain 500 feet away from us. But if he was somewhere first, like at the mall or in the grocery store, and we happened to go into the grocery store and he happened to be there shopping before us, we had to leave. If he was in the food court sitting down having coffee and we had just finished our, picking up a few odds and ends and we were getting ready to go home, we were going to grab some A&W and sit down, have our lunch before heading home. And he happened to be there. We had to leave. I never understood that one. But it was no problem for him to break that rule, that peace bond. And he used to sit outside of the apartment that we lived in his truck, and he would play the song I Wanna Know What Love Is by Foreigner, cranked full blast, windows down, and he made sure that he parked just enough so that it was 500 feet away. And he did this day in and day out for months leading up to us going to court because my dad was being charged with raping me and I was gonna have to go to court. I was gonna have to sit in front of a judge and a bunch of friggin' people and tell them all the crap that my dad put me through, have to go into very explicit details about how he raped me, when it started, what exactly was done. The list went on and on. Between him being released from prison and us going to court, he made sure that we always knew he was around. He made sure to torture us in any friggin' way that he could. Followed me home one day because he knew my school schedule. And I got off the school bus and I started walking home. And after the school bus drove off, all of a sudden I can hear like this revving of an engine and I just turn around. Here comes my dad up the road. Wanna know what love is? Playing full friggin' blast in his truck, windows down. And as I'm about to across the road to head towards our apartment door. He stepped on the gas and barreled his truck at me to the point that I had to friggin' leap from the street onto the friggin' sidewalk and roll onto the grass so he did not hit me. That's who my father was. And he ended up finally, court came along and he put me through, he put me through hell there. He made sure that he stared me down while I was sitting up there talking to the judge and talking to my lawyer. And he made sure to, I'm watching you and, making the I'm going to kill you kind of signs kind of thing. And nobody was paying attention. How do you guys not see this shit while he's doing this in court? He literally, he was going to kill me. So anyways, he ends up in prison. And he's now gone from our lives for what's supposed to be 18 months. Now, he didn't get charged for raping me from the age of 4 until I was 11, because we would have had to have gone back to every single town that we lived in and charge him over and over and over and over again until we caught up with every friggin' town that he raped me in from the age of 4 to 11. And my mom said no. And I kind of thank her for that, because I think that probably would have been a lot more hell than I had already gone through to begin with. So I thank her for that. So he only ended up getting 18 months in prison, and that was only for the time that he raped me while we were living in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. So I don't know, like a dozen times, let's say. And he got 18 months for that, a year and a half. Still blows my mind. After 9 months, however, guess what? He got out on good behavior, because he was doing AA and he was working through his steps and blah, 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 blah. And he was doing so good. He was a model prisoner and people should look up to him and should be more like him. And did you forget why he was friggin' in there? Like, seriously. Anyways, let him out of prison. And then he comes back into our lives and he tries to make peace and, tries to be a dad and, ask for forgiveness. And I'm really sorry that I put you through, and so on and so forth. And it went on and on. And then he disappeared. He was gone for a few years. No idea where he went. Just, no, I'll see you later. And just did whatever John Gallant decided to friggin' do. My mom and I, at that point, for a few years or whatever, went through a lot of crap. We ended up leaving Sault Ste. Marie and we ended up in Sudbury, Ontario. And my dad, a few months after we got to Sudbury, Ontario, my dad ended up finding us again. And I don't know how he found us, but he always managed to friggin' find us. It didn't matter where we went, he found us. I remember leaving in the middle of the night after he had beaten my mom. And my mom and I had a bag and a couple with some clothes in it, and that was it. And we were gone. And we went to the bus station and we slept in a freaking bus station bathroom stall overnight. And then we hopped the bus the next day. And we ended up out in Winnipeg. And he still found us. So anyways, we're now in Sudbury, Ontario, and I am 16 years old. And my dad decides to reappear back into our lives again. And he, as always, decided, he was the nice guy. Oh, I'm really sorry. It'll never happen again. And I don't know what I was thinking. And, you guys are my family. And I don't know why I keep doing this and blah, 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 blah. Excuse after excuse after excuse. And of course, my mom just, yep, all right, we're going to accept him back into our lives. Although they didn't live together anymore, she was going to let him back, open that door and let him back in. And then he stuck around for maybe, I don't know, 3-4 months. And he was living in Toronto at the time. And he ended up meeting apparently the love of his life. And they were going to get married and so on and so forth. So he decided to come back to Sudbury, Ontario, and to let me know that he no longer wanted my mom or myself in his life. That was it. We were gone. We no longer existed. The only way that his new marriage was going to work out is if he got rid of me and my mom. But he couldn't physically do that anymore. He literally drove from Toronto to Sudbury, Ontario, which is a good 4.5, 5-hour drive, just to let my mom to spend a weekend with us. No, let me get this straight first. To spend the weekend with us because it was going to be our last weekend together because he was getting married and we were no longer his family. Yeah, so come spend the weekend with us. It's awesome. Because on Monday, we no longer exist to you. Fantastic. And he left and he went back to Toronto and I was pissed. I was so friggin' mad. I was just so angry. I, I couldn't figure out why. All I wanted for years was a loving relationship with my father, which I never had, quite obviously. And when he finally, sobered up and stuck with his AA program and started turning his life around, that was when I thought for sure that he was going to become a good father again. Yeah, not so much. Instead, he decided to show back up in my life, let me know that he's getting married, and he wanted shit to do with me. So I was pissed. And I had literally had enough of his bullshit. And I was working at the time. I ended up telling my boss I was just working at a corner store. And I just told my boss, I said, I'm going away. I'm going to Toronto. I'm going to be gone a week. And I left. My mom warned me not to go. She did her absolute best to let me know that it was a very bad idea, that I should not be doing this, that all's going to happen is I'm going to get hurt more. But I was too pig-headed to listen. She was right. And I got to Toronto. I ended up staying with my uncle, the one that saved my life from my dad killing us with a shotgun. That was the first time I got to meet my cousin, and it was a good week at their place. You think that tracking my dad down would have been a little bit easier. It actually wasn't. My uncle really had no clue where he was. My grandparents um weren't in contact with my uncle or my dad, so nobody really knew where my dad was other than the fact that he was in the Toronto area. Because he had told me that his new wife was a nurse at a specific hospital, I was like, all right. I picked up the phone and I started calling the hospital and I tracked her down. I left her a very polite message and I just said, can you please contact me? I'm just trying to get in touch with my father. It's very important that I get in touch with him. And she called me back. And she lost her shit and told me never to call her at work ever again, that he was supposed to rid himself of us and yada, 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 yada. And she said she would pass the message on to my dad and hung up on me. She was a lovely person. Awesome stepmom. It's about 4 or 5 hours goes by and all of a sudden the phone rings and it's my dad. I'll answer the phone. And my dad is like literally losing his shit on the other end of the phone with my uncle, and I could hear some of the conversation, blah blah blah. Anyways, my uncle passes the phone to me, and now it's my turn to have my dad chew me out, and that he did. And as he was saying all these horribly disgusting, mean and cruel things to me, like he never loved me. The only reason that he raped me is because I deserved it, and just ignorant, cruel things, I guess, to hopefully be rid of me. Maybe that was his way of pushing me away so that I wouldn't, I don't know, try chasing him down again and getting him to be a friggin' father. The last words he said to me before he hung up, "I'm not your real father anyway. Your uncle is." Click. And I just sat there stunned and I cried. I cried so friggin' hard. And I just looked at my uncle who I I looked up to my uncle. My uncle saved my life on a few occasions. And this man never lied to me, ever. Never lied to me. And I looked at him and I said, "Is that true? Are you my dad and not him?" And he said, "No, honey, I'm not. He's your dad." I said, "Okay." And then I called my mom and I was crying. And of course she, didn't want to say "I told you so," but she said "I told you so" in so many words. And then I went back to Sudbury, Ontario, and for about a week, I was so depressed because of what was going on, because of my dad just rejecting me yet again, that I had decided that it was better for me not to be living in this world, better for me not to put my mom through any more pain. It would be better for me to not exist. For a week, I planned out my suicide. My first go-to was pills. And the reason being is because my mom has been suicidal my entire friggin' life, and that was her go-to, pills. So that was my, first train of thought. I was gonna take a bunch of pills and I was gonna off myself. And I was just gonna not have to hurt anymore because I was in such a dark friggin' place that when you're that dark into your own mind to the point where you want to commit suicide, there's no coming back from that. You are so deep in your thoughts that nothing else matters except the goal to take your life. For a week, I planned it out. I made sure that my mom wasn't going to be home. I was still in high school at the time, so I, fake sick that morning. I made sure everybody else was gone to work. And that's when I sat at the kitchen table and I had a bunch of pills in a bowl, just all mixed up. And they were everything from like Tylenol to sleeping pills to schizophrenic medication that my mother was on. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. Nice mumbo jumbo bowl of pills that I was determined I was going to take my life with. And I remember as I was taking some of these pills out of my mom's pill bottles, I remember leaving her some. I sit here and giggle about this now because my main concern was that she was going to be okay and that she could get some sleep. So I made sure that I left her X amount of sleeping pills so that after I died that she could sleep. That was the only thing that was going through my mind was my mom not getting any sleep. So my mom's at work and I thought that everybody was out of the house. So I sat down at the kitchen table, a couple big glasses of water, and I just started one handful after another. Water, handful of pills, water, handful of pills, until there were no more. And I remember calling school. I was trying to play off that I was my mom. I think I was just trying to call school and let them know that my daughter wasn't going to be at school today because she was sick. But the principal caught on and he was trying to keep me on the phone. He knew that I sounded weird, that something just didn't seem right. And then all of a sudden, this was the part where I guess I got up and I was trying to go, I don't know, hang the phone up or something because I was done with my conversation. I didn't want to talk anymore. And I went to go hang the phone up and I fell right there. That's the last thing I remember. Until I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. I don't remember. I was awake those 2 days in between, but I don't remember any of it. Nothing whatsoever. Apparently, my mom would have called my dad, and my dad would have actually shown up and been there while they were pumping my stomach, but I don't remember. My best friend Chantal was there. My now brother-in-law Alex was there. Don't remember any of it. Nothing whatsoever. All I remember was waking up in the hospital, my family doctor, um, looking at me and going, "How you feeling? Where am I?" I had no idea where I was, and I was just very concerned, like, am I alive? Am I dead? Is this heaven? Like, have I gone to hell? Where am I? And he looked at me and he said, "You're at the hospital, and you're gonna be here for a little while because you tried to kill yourself." I'm like, "No." So I didn't succeed? Like, no. All right, well, that kind of sucks. And he says to me, why would you want to kill yourself? I said, because I don't want to friggin' live anymore. I don't want to have to go through this pain that I continuously go through with my father. The man has tortured me my entire life, and I just wanted to put an end to it. So I tried to kill myself. A couple years goes by, my dad no longer in my life. He's dealing with his new family in Toronto, having a good old time. No idea. 18 years old, I had met a guy who ended up becoming my first husband. In and around the time that we had started dating, like we were together maybe 3 or 4 months, I'm gonna say. My dad decided to friggin' make another appearance in our goddamn lives again. His family, he no longer had. She threw him out, and he was not to have any contact with his son, and blah, blah, blah. I don't even know the whole story there, but she kicked him out, and he came running back to us because he feared that we were gonna open arms accept him. And guess what? We did. Freaking sucker for punishment, I tell you. The night he showed up, I had just gotten back from a date, and the boyfriend was spending the night. And there's my dad sitting at the kitchen table having a conversation with my mom and her girlfriend at the time. And I remember walking up the stairs, and I remember looking at my now ex-husband and saying to him, I'm really sorry for about what for what you're about to hear. Although I was always very honest with him about my past and my dad raping me and stuff like that, I didn't know exactly what was going to go down at that very moment. So I apologized ahead of time, and he said, "It's okay. I've got you. I got your back. I'm here with you." Okay. So we went in, and my dad sat there for hours. I mean, it must have been a good friggin' like 3 hours. And my mom just friggin' went up one side and right down the other side. And he sat there that entire time and didn't talk back. He just listened. He shook his head and he listened some more. And when she was finally done, whatever she had to say about all the abuse that he put her through, the shit that he put me through, and the years and years of torture, and the years of this and the years of that, when she was finally done and had gotten everything that she needed off her chest, he looked at me and he said, "It's your turn." And I did. I let everything go that day. And that's where I kind of started to make my peace with my dad. And he ended up sticking around. I was 18 years old. That's crazy to think. 18 years old when my dad finally just started to stick around and become a part of our lives and be sober and be a friggin' normal, kind human being like most people are. He was at my wedding. He paid for the wedding reception. He became the father that I always hoped that I would have. The bond that I had been missing for all those years, I was finally getting the opportunity to get that bond with my dad. It was friggin' awesome. And then my ex-husband and I had split up, and I ended up moving to Newfoundland where my mom was staying at that point in time. I was pregnant with my first child and headed to Newfoundland, stayed with my mom until October of 92. I'm sorry, my ex-husband and I had decided that we were going to reconcile our marriage, and because my dad was sick and living in Toronto, he had cancer, so we were gonna go there to take care of him so that he wasn't alone through, his chemotherapy session and so on and so forth. So that's what we did. Halloween day, 1992, I landed at the Toronto Pearson International Airport, and my dad and my now ex-husband had picked me up, and away we went to go live with my dad. And we lived with him for a little while. Things were good. He was he was going through his chemo treatments, so I mean, obviously he had his good days and his bad days, but we struggled through it. Everything was good for a little while, and then my daughter was born in February of 93. And it was at that point that my husband at the time and my dad really started to butt heads a lot. My husband and I at the time had decided that we were going to move out and move into our own place. My mom, being excited that my daughter was born and being her first grandchild, actually moved back from Newfoundland, and her and her girlfriend came to stay with us in Toronto. And we lived together for a little while, and they helped us raise our daughter, and things were good. And then one day my dad came over, and I don't remember exactly the whole incident, but I do remember him coming over, and I remember him and my husband getting into a big fight, and my dad left, and my husband literally looked at me and told me that I had to choose between him or my father. But so I would literally, when my husband was at work, I would literally sneak over to my dad's place because he was still sick with cancer to go check up on him so that my husband wouldn't be mad at me and divorce me. Crazy shit. Anyways, November the 11th, my dad passed away. My mom and I were at the hospital when it happened. We had been there for a couple weeks prior to him passing away. November the 11th, he took his last breath. And I was hurt. I was in shock. And so was my mom. And we ended up getting a ride back over to the little corner store where my mom's girlfriend worked at. It was just like a street over from where we all lived. And she went in and told her that my dad had passed and so on and so forth or whatever. And they were standing outside and we were having a smoke. And I remember being pushed aside because I tried to come in for a hug because I was sad that my dad had just died. And I was pushed away. And my mom's girlfriend and my mom stood there hugging and holding on to each other and, getting that whole reassurance, oh, it's gonna be okay, you're gonna be all right. And my mom's words to me were, I don't know what you're so sad about. You just lost a father. And I looked at her and I went, what? She looked at me and she said, and I don't know why I didn't pick up on this, but she said, I lost my brother and my husband. Now, I grew up believing that my parents were half brother and sister most of my life because of the way that my mom's schizophrenic stories. I did not know that they were full blood biological brother and sister until I came to New Brunswick in 2018 for a visit with my husband, like the year before we moved here. Dad's gone. We're now getting ready for his funeral. And boy, oh boy, that was a friggin' shit show. Thankfully, he had everything already prearranged. Everything was already ready to go. He wanted it X number of days after his passing, so on and so forth. It was all set up. His cremation, everything. We had nothing to deal with when it came to that, other than picking up his ashes because he had been cremated. Funeral rolls around. Whole bunch of people show up. People that I've definitely met before. People that I've never met before. One person that showed up at my dad's funeral that I had never met before ended up being one of my parents' sisters. She was completely freaking losing her mind at my dad's funeral, and I couldn't figure out why. She was very angry, and she was livid, and she did nothing but put my mom and my dad down, and she screamed at my uncle, and I was just, my uncle and I couldn't take it anymore. We literally left. We went out for a smoke. All of a sudden, my mom comes downstairs, and she's freaking bawling her face off, and I'm like, "Okay, like, what is going on?" And then she told me that this aunt had said all this very nasty stuff, and that my grandparents had said nasty stuff about my 9-month-old daughter. And that's when I went up the stairs, and I went right to them. The first ones I went to were my grandparents, and I told them that just because you treated me like shit my entire life gives you absolutely no right to treat my daughter that way. If you do not want to be a part of her life, that's perfectly fine. Name calling stops here, stops now, or I'm having you friggin' removed from this funeral home. Then I went to my aunt, and my aunt started screaming and yelling about all the shit that my parents had done without going into details, just that because of your parents, her family got completely ruined. It's all their fault. They're gonna burn in hell for what they've done. And she was just freaking like losing her mind. Now, at this point in time, I'm thinking that she found out about the fact that I was sexually abused and so on and so forth or whatever, and this is what she's angry at. Completely not. She's pissed at the fact that my parents are brother and sister, and that they lived this lie all their friggin' lives, or most of their lives, and ended up having not one, but two children, because I'm not an only child, out of their relationship. And that's what this aunt was pissed about. But I didn't realize it until many years later. It was shit like this that when my dad finally died in 1993 that I figured, whew, I am finally done with my dad's abuse. Although it was heartbreaking, it was very freeing at the same time, because I no longer had to watch over my shoulder anymore. I no longer had to worry about someone running me down with a freaking truck. I no longer had to worry about hearing that damn song, I Want to Know What Love Is, playing over and over and over again as a constant reminder that no matter what we try to do, we will never get away from this man. Never again. And a few years after that, I finally sat down and wrote my book. It's called Living Past Being a Victim, because I thought that story was going to be literally my only story. I thought that was going to be my way of healing from the trauma that I had gone through as a child and into my adult years. Little did I know that in 2018 that I came home for a visit, that I would find out that my parents were full biological brother and sister. And I was so frigging mad. I was mad. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Although it didn't fully shock me, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I couldn't believe that for all these friggin' years, that some of that schizophrenic story that my mom would friggin' tell me was actually true. And that, although she didn't tell me the entire truth, because they are full brother and sister, not half friggin' brother and sister like she told me, there was truth behind that. And almost 25 years later, give or take, in 2018, my father reached out from the grave and slapped me in the face one more time. Yeah, thanks for that, Dad. Appreciate that shit. For years, I carried around this man's ashes everywhere. Everywhere that I moved, I made sure that those friggin' ashes came with me because when my dad passed away, him and I were on good terms. And he made me promise him that I would spread his ashes at Lake Louise because we used to go fishing there a lot when I was a kid. And I said, you know what? That's something I can do for you. And for years, I carried these ashes around with the hope that one day I would get back out there and be able to spread his ashes for him. And then when we moved here and I got handed my mom's birth certificate and so on and so forth, and then the anger just really started to boil. I literally took my dad's ashes and I spread them because I just did not want to hang on to his ashes anymore. I was pissed. And to me, that was the only way of breaking free from the trauma that he had put me through for all these friggin' years, was just I spread his ashes. I did not spread them out in Lake Louise. Sorry about that, Dad, but sorry, not sorry. I put his ashes somewhere that I feel he can rest in peace. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of my dad, John Gillian. Take care, and we'll see you next time.